They say some places never truly die, but linger, breathing forgotten histories and unspeakable terrors into the present. In the annals of American folklore, one dark legend stands apart, not because of cinematic exaggeration, but because of its terrifying historical footprint. This narrative investigates a force so malevolent it allegedly achieved the impossible. It remains the only documented case in the nation where a spirit is said to have murdered a living man. The frontier of the early 19th century was a place of isolation, where the wilderness held sway over fragile pioneer settlements. In the harsh winter of 1817, the quiet farming community of Adams, Tennessee was defined by hard labor and devout faith. Here, a prosperous farmer sought to build a legacy for his family. He could not have known his land would soon become the epicenter of a historic nightmare. John Bell was a pragmatic patriarch who relied on his own two hands and the fertile soil beneath his boots. His torment began with a seemingly mundane, yet deeply unsettling encounter in his own cornfield. He reported seeing a bizarre creature possessing the body of a dog but the head of a rabbit, vanishing into the stalks before he could raise his rifle. This strange apparition was merely the opening movement of a relentless symphony of terror. Soon, the strange occurrences breached the threshold of the family home. It started with subtle, rhythmic sounds echoing through the wooden walls late at night. The family heard scratching against the floorboards, the heavy thud of invisible stones dropping onto the roof, and the distinct sound of chains dragged across the hardwood. These nocturnal disturbances escalated with terrifying speed, stripping the household of any peace. The unseen force quickly shifted its focus from the architecture to the people trapped inside. The youngest daughter, Betsy, bore the brunt of the physical violence. She awoke screaming as invisible hands slapped her face, pulled her hair, and drove pins into her skin. The bruises left behind were undeniable, marking the flesh of a terrified child and proving the torment was far more than mere frontier superstition. Desperation drove the patriarch to seek the counsel of his closest neighbors. James Johnston, a devout friend, agreed to spend a night in the besieged cabin, armed with a Bible and a skeptical mind. His skepticism evaporated when his heavy blankets were violently ripped from his bed by an unseen entity. Johnston fled the room, declaring the house was gripped by an unholy spirit, cementing the community's realization that a true haunting was underway. The entity did not remain a silent, unseen assailant for long. It developed a voice, starting as a weak, disembodied whisper echoing from the dark corners of the parlor. Over the months, this whisper grew into a deafening resonance that could mimic neighbors, quote scripture flawlessly, and hurl vicious insults. The intelligence behind the voice was staggering, demonstrating a profound knowledge of the community's deepest secrets. A suffocating dread settled over the property, transforming the thriving farm into a theater of psychological warfare. The family lived in perpetual exhaustion, their nerves frayed by relentless nocturnal assaults and the mocking laughter filling the air. Visitors flocked to the property, drawn by morbid curiosity, only to be verbally eviscerated by the unseen presence. The sheer volume of witnesses transformed the private tragedy into a deeply public spectacle. Word of the terrifying phenomena spread far beyond the borders of the small community, reaching the ears of a future president. General Andrew Jackson, a man renowned for fearless military campaigns, decided to travel to the property to investigate the claims himself. Accompanied by hardened soldiers, he approached the farm with the intent of exposing a fraud. The frontier hero was about to confront an enemy immune to lead and steel. The confrontation began before the military men even crossed the property line. As their heavy wagon approached the boundaries of the farm, the horses inexplicably froze in their tracks. The animals strained against their harnesses, eyes wide with panic, yet the wheels refused to turn. Jackson himself ordered his men to whip the horses, but the physical laws of the world seemed entirely suspended. A sharp, metallic voice suddenly materialized in the empty air above the paralyzed wagon. It mocked the general, informing him that the carriage would not move until the entity permitted it. The men, veterans of brutal wars, stood frozen in shock as the invisible presence commanded the wheels to turn once more. The horses immediately lurched forward, pulling the heavy load as if nothing had ever impeded their path. The night spent inside the cabin proved even more harrowing for the general and his men. One soldier, claiming to possess a silver bullet capable of killing any demon, was violently thrown across the room by an unseen force. He was beaten and dragged out the door by his boots, screaming into the darkness. Jackson reportedly fled the property the following morning, allegedly declaring he would rather fight the British again than face the Bell Witch. The identity of the tormentor remained a subject of chilling debate among terrified locals. The entity offered conflicting narratives, sometimes claiming to be a displaced spirit, other times a demon summoned from the earth. It eventually adopted the persona of a deceased neighbor who had harbored a bitter grudge against the patriarch. Yet the sheer power of the poltergeist activity suggested something far older and more complex than a mere vengeful ghost. As the years dragged on, the relentless assaults began to take a severe physical toll on the head of the household. He suffered from strange facial tics, a swelling of the tongue that prevented eating, and a profound, unexplained weakness. The entity openly celebrated his declining health, mocking his pain and loudly proclaiming its intention to put him in his grave. The farm had become a slow, agonizing execution chamber. The climax of this dark history arrived on a cold December morning. The patriarch was found entirely unresponsive in his bed, a strange vial of unknown liquid resting on the wooden table beside him. When a drop of the mysterious substance was fed to a stray cat, the animal convulsed and died instantly. The disembodied voice echoed through the room in a tone of triumphant malice, proudly confessing it had administered the lethal dose. The patriarch breathed his last breath, marking a terrifying milestone in the annals of paranormal history. The entity had seemingly achieved its ultimate morbid goal, extinguishing the life of the man it had relentlessly hunted for years. The community reeled in shock, struggling to comprehend how an invisible force could physically murder a respected citizen. The boundaries between the natural world and the supernatural void had been violently shattered. The horror did not end with the cessation of a heartbeat. As the grieving family gathered at the rural cemetery to lower the wooden casket into the frozen earth, the silence was shattered by a sound that chilled the mourners to the bone. The entity's voice erupted into a boisterous, off-key rendition of a drinking song, echoing across the gravestones. It was a final, sickening act of desecration that left witnesses weeping in terror. Following the burial, the violent physical assaults and the deafening whispers abruptly ceased. The entity announced its departure, promising the exhausted family it would return after a span of 7 years. True to its word, a brief resurgence of knocking and scratching occurred in 1828, though it lacked the lethal intensity of the original siege. The force then promised to return again in a century, leaving behind a legacy of generational dread. Decades slipped into centuries, and the physical structures of the original farm eventually rotted back into the earth. Yet, the oppressive atmosphere never truly lifted from the surrounding landscape. The dark energy seemed to seep into the very limestone beneath the soil, concentrating in a cavernous opening near the original property line. This subterranean labyrinth became a monument to the region's tragic past, a place where shadows felt unnervingly heavy. The psychological stain left by the events of the early 19th century fundamentally altered the cultural fabric of the region. The tale of the malevolent spirit became a cautionary whisper passed down through generations. It transformed the quiet agricultural community into a permanent fixture on the map of the macabre, a place where the line between historical fact and chilling folklore is permanently blurred. Scholars and skeptics have spent decades attempting to dissect the surviving accounts, searching for a rational explanation. Theories range from complex psychological hysteria and elaborate family hoaxes to the manifestation of undiagnosed neurological disorders. Yet, none of these explanations fully account for the sheer volume of independent witnesses, the physical injuries sustained, or the profound intelligence displayed by the disembodied voice. The true terror lies in the documentation, in the diaries and letters written by pragmatic men who had no reason to invent such horrors. These were not superstitious peasants but frontier farmers, clergy, and military leaders who found themselves confronting an abyss they could not comprehend. Their written testimonies serve as a chilling testament to a reality that exists just beyond the edges of human understanding. To walk the grounds of Adams today is to tread upon soil soaked in an ancient, unresolved trauma. The rustling of the wind through the trees sounds suspiciously like a whispered threat, and the deep shadows of the cave seem to harbor secrets better left undisturbed. The lingering presence of that long-ago terror still looms over the landscape, a silent reminder of the fragility of human life in the face of the unknown. The story of the entity that devastated a frontier family is not merely a ghost story to be told around a campfire. It is a profound, unsettling historical anomaly that challenges our understanding of the natural order. It leaves us with a lingering, terrifying question that echoes through the centuries. If an unseen force can manifest with such violent, lethal intent, what truly waits for us in the dark?